Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back in to another recruiting throwback video. This time, looking back at all the number 2 overall players. You know, I did this with the number 1 overall players. Now I am going to be doing it with the second rated players in every single class, starting in 2024 and then going backwards all the way back to the class of 2000. So when it comes to 2024, these kids still in high school. I believe they're going into their junior years. Maybe they're, I don't know exactly, but either way, the current number 2 player, this could change. This is fluid. The class of 2024 and 2023 are fluid, but it is JADYN Davis. A very interesting story with this kid. Originally, when they did their initial 2024 rankings, this kid was the number 1 player in the nation. He is now sitting at number 2, but he does just have a rating of 9978. So normally the number 2 overall player has a better rating than that. The thing with this kid is it was looking like he was going to go to Ohio State. Ryan Day said, no, I want Dylan Raiola. I think Dylan Raiola ends up the number 1 player in this class. He's currently ranked 8th. Will this kid remain at number 2? It's he could. Apparently, he didn't have the best sophomore season. He is from North Carolina. And, you know, right now, when it comes to his recruitment, maybe Clemson is a school he looks at. It was looking like he was going to go to Ohio State, but they already got their quarterback for the class of 2024. When comparing him to someone, I would say maybe a bigger Kyler Murray. A little bit taller Kyler Murray. He's 6 foot 190 right now. Going to be a very interesting prospect. He is the number 2 prospect in the class of 2024. Moving back to 2023, the current number 2 overall prospect is Malachi Nelson, who I think could be better than Arch Manning. And this is a kid in the final rankings. I don't know if they're going to have anyone pass Arch Manning, but if someone does, it will be Malachi Nelson, currently committed to USC. He is from California. This kid was originally committed to Oklahoma. He decommitted and followed Lincoln Riley to USC. That just goes to show you, Lincoln Riley already making changes with the USC football program. You're getting a number 2 overall prospect you wouldn't have gotten. You know, this is a superstar quarterback, very mobile, very athletic, 6'3", 180. That's exactly what you want when you're looking at maybe a little bit taller, but still 6'3" is perfectly fine for an elite quarterback prospect. Malachi Nelson, I would be very surprised if he fell very much at all. So probably going to remain the number 2 overall prospect in 2023 behind just Arch Manning. Moving back to the class of 2022, it's going to be Walter Nolen, the massive defensive tackle from the state of Tennessee. He ends up committing to Texas A&M as part of their massive NIL recruiting defensive line haul. This recruitment was extremely dirty. I mean, you had money involved. Whoever was going to give him the best deal is where he was going. Early on in his recruitment, some of the schools just, like Ohio State, for example, I mean, the recruiting insiders were saying, listen, the kid's considering Ohio State, but it's just not going to happen. He wants money, and some of these schools are just not going to give it to him. So he was looking at Tennessee. He was looking at Texas A&M. There was I don't know what the deal was. It never got reported, but I'm guessing very easily for the number 2 overall prospect, 7 figures, very easily, NIL deal to go to Texas A&M, and he will be a true freshman. We'll see how much playing time he gets with Texas A&M. He was the number 2 overall player. Moving back to 2021, the number 2 overall player, Korey Foreman. Now, Korey Foreman originally was the number 1 overall player until Quinn Ewers reclassified to 2021, which bumped Foreman back to the number 2 overall player. From the state of California, he commits to USC. That's a big recruiting win for Clay Helton at the time, and he will be going into his second year. I know he played a little bit his freshman year, but didn't do much. USC really wasn't involved. They're expecting him to be a big superstar pass rusher, and certainly he has the ability to be one. I would expect him to be a top 10 pick, 3 and done. He'll be leaving as a junior from USC. We'll see how impactful he is. Personally, I think JT Tuimoloau should have been the number 1 overall player But again, with Ewers reclassifying to the class of 2021, he was always going to be, if he reclassified, the number 1 player. Back to 2020, the number 2 overall player. This is where we can start getting into if these players actually are worthy of being ranked 2nd overall. Bryce Young, absolutely major recruiting win for all of these services. He's very likely going to be a top 3 pick in the 2023 NFL Draft. He's already won a Heisman. He's got a Heisman under his belt. He is looking for a national title from the state of California, coming out of an absolute powerhouse high school. This is a type of kid that if Lincoln Riley was at USC, he would have committed to I think he was committed to USC, then decommitted, then committed to Alabama. This is why Lincoln Riley is so important for USC recruiting. Bryce Young would be a Trojan if Lincoln Riley had been on their staff while they were recruiting him. He wasn't. USC was looking like a dumpster fire, so he leaves the state, goes to Alabama, and he is developed into at least probably a top 3 or top 4 pick in the NFL Draft. Bryce Young, the number 2 overall player for the class of 2020. Back to the class of 2019, the number 2 overall player, another massive recruiting win by the services, KAYVON THIBODEAUX from the state of California. Thibodeaux originally, I remember when they first released the initial first class of 2019, the rankings, Thibodeaux was the number 1 overall player. He finishes the cycle ranked number 2 overall, and he was drafted, I believe, 5th overall to the New York Giants. It was either 5th or 7th. I believe 5th because they had both the 5th and 7th picks. But Thibodeaux, very nice college career. Unfortunately, his junior season got cut short due to an injury. But overall, you got to say this is a massive recruiting win. The number 2 overall player. Yeah, he wasn't picked 1st or 2nd. But still, I mean, being drafted inside the top 10, that's really all you can ask for. So Thibodeaux, really good college career, and then was drafted very high, so the University of Oregon does a good job. Back to the class of 2018, the number 2 overall player, Justin Fields. I would say this is another major recruiting win for the services. Ranked as the number 2 overall player, ends up getting picked number 11th overall by the Chicago Bears. Kind of fell a little bit. People thought he was going to be a top 10 pick, but either way, going 11th overall, Justin Fields. He finished top 3, I believe, 2 different years. No, just 1 year for Ohio State in terms of the Heisman. Won a bunch of games, Big Ten quarterback of the year, Big Ten player of the year his sophomore season with the Buckeyes. You know, commits, originally actually committed to Penn State when he was ranked around 200th in the nation. He had a massive jump in his overall recruitment, got ranked 2nd overall, decommitted from Penn State, commits to Georgia, but Kirby Smart dealing with the whole Jake Fromm situation, doesn't end up starting Justin Fields. Fields sees the writing on the wall. He says, I want to start immediately. He transfers to Ohio State, gets the immediate eligibility, which a lot of people were pissed about at the time because there wasn't the transfer portal, but he claimed there was some racial stuff going on at Georgia, and they let him through, and then has 2 really good years at Ohio State and gets developed. Had that great game against Clemson, of course. So Justin Fields, very interesting college career. Penn State to Georgia. A lot of people don't remember he was committed to Penn State when he was a smaller recruit. And he ends up at Ohio State and ends up as a 1st-round pick. Back to 2017, it's going to be Najee Harris. So Najee Harris is another player. This dude was ranked number 1 overall for the longest time, probably through for 75% of the entire 2017 recruiting cycle. Najee Harris was the number 1 overall player. The reason I think he fell was because we saw a shift away from the NFL with running backs. They didn't value them as much, so he fell, ended up being ranked number 2 overall, the number 1 overall running back, and the number 2 overall player in the state of California. Ends up going to Alabama. His recruitment was a little interesting there at the end, especially with Michigan. Michigan thought they were going to get Najee Harris, guys. They did. It was a crazy recruitment. I remember following it, but he ends up staying put. Michigan couldn't flip him. He stays and goes to Alabama, where he was developed into a 1st-round pick. I believe he was picked 24th overall by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Had multiple 1,000-yard seasons, won a national title with Bama. So that's another recruiting hit by the services. Back onto the class of 2016, the number 2 overall player was Dexter Lawrence. I remember watching Dexter Lawrence as a true freshman and thinking this dude was going to be an absolute, like the next Ndamukong Suh. It really didn't develop. I know he was a 1st-round pick to the New York Giants, I believe, in the draft, like 17th overall. So you have to say that's a recruiting win for the services. You know, ranked 2nd overall, he is a first-round pick, but he didn't develop exactly how I thought he was going to. From the state of North Carolina, goes to Clemson University. It's interesting. I wonder if Dexter Lawrence was like a recruit in the class, if he was a recruit in the class of 2020, just, you know, for example, with Mack Brown at North Carolina, if he would have gone to North Carolina. Because Mack Brown has landed some huge 5-star recruits recently, but Mack Brown wasn't there, obviously, back in 2016, and he ends up staying in the Carolinas, but goes to a South Carolina school, the University of Clemson, where he did have a nice 3 years. He was a 3-and-done and was picked in the 1st round. So a lot of these number 2 overall players recently have been, you know, major hits by the recruiting service. As I say that, we go to the doomed class of 2015, and it's going to be Martez Ivey, the offensive tackle who did go undrafted. From the state of Florida, he commits to Florida. He was barely the number 2 overall player. If you guys remember, the number 1 overall player in 2015 was Trenton Thompson, who also went undrafted. I did an entire video on how the class of 2015 was so bad, but Ivey was supposed to be a franchise-type left tackle. You watch him at these camps, he was huge. He looked so impressive. And Florida, they thought they were getting themselves an elite stalwart type tackle that they could really lean on, and it just didn't end up working out. He ends up going undrafted. He's been on some practice squads and stuff, but I don't think he's taken a single snap in the NFL. Maybe he has, but I don't think he has. So class of 2015, that's a major recruiting miss, obviously. He went undrafted. Back to the class of 2015. To the 2014 class, Myles Garrett from the state of Texas. Myles Garrett commits to Texas A&M, and he ends up the number 1 overall pick of the Cleveland Browns just 3 years later. What a major recruiting hit by the services. The number 1 overall player, Leonard Fournette, was the 4th overall pick. So that was a really accurate 1-2 punch for the class of 2014. Garrett had an unbelievable career at Texas A&M. Very similar, though, to Jadeveon Clowney, where, like, midway through his sophomore year, you basically knew he was guaranteed to be the number 1 overall pick. Like, midway through his sophomore year, we knew that. He still had an entire junior year to go. And because he's just this crazy, athletic freak pass rusher, just like Jadeveon Clowney, everyone knew no matter what he does as a junior, he's going to be the number 1 overall pick. That's the career of Myles Garrett at Texas A&M, but he had a few really good years at A&M and ended up being the number 1 overall pick. So that's a major recruiting hit. Class of 2013, here's a real sad story. It's Jaylon Smith. We remember, I'm not going to say this is a miss, Jaylon Smith falling to the 2nd round. The only reason, injury. The only reason this kid would have been a top 10, if not top 5 pick, if he doesn't get injured in that Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State, the last game of his college career. It's horrible. But you have to let the record show. This kid came back, had a few really good years with the Dallas Cowboys, and earned himself a big contract, which ended up being a horrible contract for the Cowboys, but still, he earned himself a good contract. Since then, Jaylon Smith pretty much is busted out of the NFL, but he had a good few years with the Cowboys, really good years with Notre Dame. This kid as a recruit was an absolute superstar from Fort Wayne, Indiana, commits to Notre Dame, one of the top Notre Dame recruits of all time. Absolute beast, athletic linebacker, could cover, could tackle, was physical, everything you want in a franchise-type linebacker, had an amazing college career, and was well on his way to being a top 10 pick. If not for the major injury he suffered where he missed all his rookie season, was still picked in the early 2nd round. The Cowboys took a chance on him, and let the record show, he did earn a really nice 2nd contract in the NFL. So I'd say that's a hit, man. You can't blame, like, that's a crazy injury in the last game of his college season. He would have been a top 10 pick. He would have. Back to the class of 2012, kind of a forgotten guy, Mario Edwards, a defensive tackle from the state of Texas, ends up committing to Florida State. I believe Mario Edwards was a 2nd round pick, if I remember correctly, of the Chicago Bears. Maybe he was a 1st round. I do not believe so. But either way, Mario Edwards, really kind of a forgettable college career, let's be honest. I would say this is a miss. He just didn't live up to his overall potential as a big defensive tackle from the state of Texas. I mean, you're the number 2 overall player. You're ranked 9995. You gotta put a little bit more in production than that. You really do. So I would say that's a recruiting miss. Going back to the class of 2011, it's a big boy offensive tackle from the state of Maryland, CYRUS KOUANDJIO, who ended up going to Alabama, the number 2 overall player, the number 1 overall offensive tackle in the entire country, and he ended up being the 44th overall pick, so a second-round pick. I would say this is a miss, though. I mean, you're talking about the number 2 overall player from Maryland going to Alabama. You're expecting an Evan Neal-type career, where you're a franchise left tackle and you end up a top 10 pick, and this kid being drafted 44th overall, he did stick around in the NFL, and he has started multiple seasons, but I would say it's not a terrible miss. I mean, there's been some bad misses, and we'll get to those as we go further back, but I would say that's a recruiting miss. You're hoping for, like, if a dude's ranked 2nd overall and he's an offensive tackle, you're hoping for, like, an Evan Neal type thing where, this is a franchise left tackle, he's going to be a top 10, top 12 type pick. Moving back to 2010, the class of 2010, it's another big boy offensive tackle from the state of Minnesota. It's going to be SEANTREL Henderson from Minnesota to Miami. What a unique recruitment. This kid goes from Minnesota. Imagine if he committed to Minnesota University, the number 2 overall player. I would salute that. But this kid, this is one of the rare situations. A former 5-star turned 7th round pick. This kid, the number 2 overall player, ended up being a 7th round pick. Obviously, it's a recruiting miss. You don't even have to say that. But that is pretty crazy. He ended up, you're hoping for just a massive elite offensive tackle. It's tough to, with the recruiting rankings when it comes to these offensive tackles, it's a lot of the rankings for the offensive tackles are inaccurate. And that's just another one. Moving back to the class of 2009, Bryce Brown. Another situation where this kid was the number 2 overall player turned 7th round draft pick from the University of Tennessee. He was originally from the state of Kansas, number 2 overall player. Next, Adrian Peterson. Next, LaShawn McCoy. He did kind of have a running style like LaShawn McCoy, but I vividly remember this kid, if you search like Bryce Brown Sunday Night Football, he had a crazy Sunday Night Football game. I think it was against the Cowboys. I don't know exactly, but maybe like 200 yards or something. Maybe like 2010, 2011, or no, it had to have been like 2013. But either way, I remember just randomly Bryce Brown. He definitely had the talent, and you could see it, in his ability to jump cut and things like that. You could see why he was the number 2 overall player. That's why I love 5-stars, because just they're such physical freaks. Even if they're busts, you can just see the talent. It's just crazy. And this kid, you got to say it's a recruiting miss. What are you going to do? From the state of Kansas, he ends up back-to-back number 2 overall players, Henderson and Bryce Brown. Number 2 overall players end up 7th round picks. Pretty crazy. Back to the class of 2008, Terrelle Pryor. What an interesting recruitment this guy had. From the state of Pennsylvania, ends up going to Ohio State, and this dude technically did go undrafted. He was drafted in the supplemental draft of the NFL. But you really can't count him as undrafted. The only reason he didn't get picked in the actual draft was due to the whole tattoo gate thing. Very interesting, unique quarterback prospect who did play quarterback for a few seasons with the Oakland Raiders and then transitioned and actually had a 1,000-yard season with the Cleveland Browns when they were, I believe, 0-16, the 0-16 season they had. He had 1,000 yards. So Terrelle Pryor, just a physical freak. I mean, anytime you could be a starting quarterback in the NFL, albeit he wasn't a good one, but still, starting quarterback in the NFL, transition to a starting receiver and have a 1,000-yard season, even if it's on a terrible team, physical freak. And I think Terrelle Pryor still owns the longest rushing touchdown of a QB ever with the Oakland Raiders. It was like a 93-yard touchdown, if I remember correctly. So just an absolute freak, and had won that Sugar Bowl against Arkansas for Ohio State. Of course, it got taken away. They're trying to restore those wins, by the way. We'll see if they can get those back. But Terrelle Pryor had a good career at Ohio State. And then, the issues with Tattoo Gate caused him to go undrafted. Back to the class of 2017, Jimmy Clausen. So here is your typical QB recruiting bust. This kid, 6'3", 200. I always thought Jimmy Clausen looked a lot smaller than 6'3". Like, if you were to ask me his height, I would probably say 6'1". This kid, the number 2 overall player, the number 1 overall quarterback, state of California, commits to Notre Dame, and he just couldn't hack it. It is what it is. Sometimes you think you can see a guy, he looks amazing, he looks like the next Tom Brady. It ends up, for whatever reason, not working out. It didn't work out for Jimmy Clausen at Notre Dame or in the NFL. He is one of your typical recruiting busts and a clear miss. Back to the class of 2006, it's Percy Harvin from the state of Virginia. Number 2 overall prospect, number 1 overall player, listed as a wide receiver. He was really a do-it-all. He was a major recruiting hit. Probably the most potent offensive player in those Urban Meyer, maybe you could say Tim Tebow, but this dude's athleticism was unbelievable. And I think he was a little bit ahead of his time in terms of the NFL. During his prime, there was really a lack of innovation among offensive coordinators. Like, when you take a look at Percy Harvin in his prime, was he worse than Deebo Samuel currently is? I think he's better than Deebo Samuel. I just don't think there was an innovation. There was no Kyle Shanahan's, that could get the overall pass catch, run ability out of Percy Harvin like the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan have been able to get out of Deebo Samuel. So a little bit ahead of his time, unbelievable elite talent, won 2 national titles with Florida. Major recruiting hit. Percy Harvin had a long career in the NFL. I still remember him returning that kickoff for a touchdown against the Denver Broncos when they destroyed the Broncos like 53-8, or was it 43-8? Either way, they destroyed him in the Super Bowl with Peyton. Remember, the first play of that game was a safety. Back to the class of 2005, just an absolute bust. Patrick Turner. USC had a lot of receivers that were recruiting busts. Number 2 overall player, one of the highest ranked receivers in recruiting history. Ended up being a 3rd-round pick to the New York Jets, where he played like a year in the NFL. I think this dude was on one of my biggest busts list. Just a major bust, so that's a major recruiting miss for the services. Back to the class of 2004. Ted Ginn Jr., listed as a cornerback. That's amazing. From Glenville, which used to be a powerhouse. I believe Ohio State is currently recruiting a linebacker for 2022 from Glenville, Arvell Reese. He's a 5-star prospect. I'm kidding, he's a 3-star. But Ted Ginn Jr., 9th overall pick of the Miami Dolphins. We remember the big play he had in the national championship against Florida, returning the opening kickoff for a touchdown and getting injured on the play, and then Ohio State gets destroyed. But Ted Ginn, speed kills. He's had a long pro career. Yes, he's had drop issues, but still the 9th overall pick from the number 2 overall player. That is a major recruiting hit for the services. One of the all-time Buckeye greats, especially the all-time return great, of course. Back to the class of 2003. This is another USC receiver. Oh my goodness. I'm going to have to do a video on USC receivers. Whitney Lewis, one of the all-time highest ranked receivers. I do not think he was drafted. Oh yeah, I remember this kid. He transferred to Northern Illinois, and he's just a complete bust. He's got a great name for a receiver. Like, I could see a dude being named Whitney Lewis being a superstar receiver. It just didn't work out for him. It is what it is. Class of 2003, one of the biggest busts, goes undrafted. Back to the class of 2002, Lorenzo Booker. It seems like the Florida State guys are always the most forgettable. This dude had a very forgettable career. I doubt anyone remembers him being the number 2 overall recruit from the state of California. He ended up, I believe, getting picked in the 3rd round and had a decent, okay NFL career, but I'd say that's a miss. I mean, you go from the number 2 overall player to being a 3rd round pick. Back to the class of 2001, it's going to be Brodie CROYLE. Just an absolute bust from the state of Alabama, the number 2 overall player, the number 1 overall quarterback, commits to the Crimson Tide. And I was looking up his career stats. He has a career NFL record as a starting quarterback of 0-10. He got drafted in the 3rd round, number 2 overall player. His career record in the NFL was 0-10. These early rankings, it's so tough. They were so inaccurate, but it is funny to look back. And then the last year, they have the rankings, class of 2000. Brock Berlin, one of the biggest busts of all time, to the University of Florida from Louisiana. This kid ended up transferring to Miami and was undrafted in the NFL and did very little in the NFL. One of the biggest busts. So I have actually compiled the total numbers. The total players that we can use is 21 because some of the players are still in, college or in high school. And the total number of drafted players was 17. The only 4 that went undrafted: IVEY, Terrelle Pryor, although I don't know if you can include Terrelle Pryor, Whitney Lewis, and then Brock Berlin. You had 7 total first-round picks out of the 21 players, and then 4 of them were top 10 picks, and then you had 1 number 1 overall pick. That was Myles Garrett. So that's out of the number 2 overall players ranked. Those are their total numbers. You also had 2 7th-round picks, which is interesting. But guys, definitely the number 1 overall players vastly outperform the number 2 overall players in terms of NFL success, college success. You would expect it, but it's pretty stark in comparison when I compared and actually looked at them. But guys, overall, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I am, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.